Thank you very much, Alex. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much again for joining us at Chula Futures Literacy Week. We are here now for the closing plenary, entitled Futures Literacy, Connecting Communities, Transforming Governance. This session addresses key questions, including how futures literacy can help to shape our better futures by connecting communities and realigning our efforts. Our moderators is Associate Professor Dr. Apiwat Ratanawaraha. Dr. Apiwat is a leading scholar and practitioner of strategic foresight in Thailand, while teaching and researching urban policy and management, infrastructure planning and finance, technology and innovation policy and strategic foresight. He actively collaborates with multiple sectors, including civil society, government agencies, corporate actors. May I now welcome Dr. Apiwat to lead the final plenary. Ajahn Apiwat, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kun Michiko. And welcome everyone back to the closing plenary of this wonderful international conference. As Kun Michiko kindly introduced me, I will serve as the moderator of the session. We have 5 distinguished speakers today, and please let me introduce our panelists. The first panelist is Ms. Géraldine Ansart, Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration, or the IOM, in Thailand. Welcome. The second speaker today is Professor Ora-orn Poocharoen, the founding director of School of Public Policy, Mai University. Swadee krap. The third is Professor Yuto Kitamura from the Graduate School of Education at the University of Tokyo. Swadee krap. And Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor of International Relations, as well as the Director of Center for Genocide Studies, University of Dhaka. Hello. And Professor Surichai Wun'Gaeo, Professor Emeritus of Sociology and the Director of Center for Peace and Conflict Studies here at Chulalongkorn University. Swadee krap. All right, so as the title of the conference suggests, and as well as the title of the theme of the closing plenary, Futures Literacy, Connecting Communities, Transforming Governance. As the title here suggests, the overarching theme of our session is really about futures literacy and how futures literacy could help people and communities with diverse backgrounds, interests, and desires connect with one another so we can jointly build the global commons that is just and sustainable, particularly during this time with this all turbulence and uncertainties around the world. So the global commons here is broadly defined. It encompasses tangible objects such as common pool resources like air, water, as well as intangible goals such as international peace. So during this closing plenary session, I would like to ask our panelists to reflect on the following issues. The first round, we will have 3 rounds. The first round, I will ask a couple of questions. The second round, another couple of questions. And the third round will be the open session for general discussion. So the first round, I would like to ask our panelists to respond to the following questions. First, what challenges do we face as we try to connect communities broadly defined from the local level and all the way to the global level? What challenges do we face as the community to create the global commons? And how can we overcome such challenges? So I would like to ask Géraldine first, if you could kindly respond to the 2 questions, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Apiwat, and good afternoon to our dear panelists and to the participants today. Thank you also to the Chulalongkorn University, as well as the Thai National Commission for UNESCO for organizing the event. I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute today to this discussion and offer the perspective of the United Nations in Thailand and my own organization, IOM, the International Organization for Migration. As you know, the UN is funded on the pillars of human rights, peace and security, development also, and to bring together countries and peoples to build understanding and cooperation and diffuse conflict and crisis. And more than 75 years after its formation, this is clearly still a work in progress. So to address the topic today on challenges in connecting communities, I think we need to start with the recent events, which show how fragile peace can be, given the tragedy taking place in Ukraine right now and the global uncertainty that resulted from the events. In my own work, previously related to the conflict in Syria, but also now in Myanmar, we see that the most vulnerable, including migrants and displaced people, are affected first and most severely by conflict and instability, but with consequences felt across societies. These events do not happen in isolation, though, and I think we need to consider the full scope of challenges facing Thailand and the world right now, from COVID-19 and growing inequalities, the climate crisis and environmental degradation, to shrinking civic spaces and the necessity of inclusive and participatory decision-making. I think you will agree that these problems are interconnected and call for what we call integrated policy and solutions. Most of all, they require partnerships that include local and community-based organizations, civil society and the private sector, and governments and the international community. But today in my speech, I would like to also be as grounded as possible about the strategic direction for the United Nations and the policies that we think are making a difference in Thailand and the region, and how we can build coalitions to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. So for my intervention, I would like to focus on 3 points. The first one on the new Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which is guiding the United Nations in Thailand over the next 5 years. My second point will be around the principle of leave no one behind, which is really underpinning all our work in the country. And my third point will be around the critical role of civil society and inclusive decision-making for equitable and resilient societies. So I'll start, if I may, on the first point, the UN country framework. So in January this year, we, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Economic and Social Development Council, signed the 5 years cooperation framework following extensive consultation with the government of Thailand and civil society. This framework is built to align, of course, with Thailand's national development strategies with 3 central priorities. The first one, a transformation towards the green, resilient, and low carbon economy. The second priority for this UN-Thailand partnership is the development of human capital by strengthening institutions and empowering people. And the third priority is around ensuring that all people in Thailand participate and benefit from development, free from discrimination and leaving no one behind. So this is really a clear roadmap for economic and social transformation, which is reflected in Thailand's own development plans, but also takes on the added urgency in the COVID-19 recovery period to build back better, rather than entrench harmful practices or amplify inequality gaps that we've seen. So now I'll pass to my point number 2, which is really around the leave no one behind agenda, which is critical to the work of the United Nations here in Thailand. IOM is the co-chair of the Cooperation Framework Coordination Group on Leave No One Behind. Obviously, migration is mainstream throughout the UN Cooperation Framework in recognition of the importance of migrants to the economies and social fabric of the region. As you might know, Thailand is a champion country implementing the Global Compact on Migration, with nearly 4 million migrant workers here in the country, employed in lower wage occupations, but that are key pillars of the economy, such as construction, manufacturing, agriculture, fisheries, and hospitality. I commend the government's leadership in the inclusive COVID-19 public health response and commitment to providing free vaccination for everyone living in Thailand, including both documented and undocumented migrants. As we recover and prepare for future shocks, the pandemic has made it very clear that all of our welfare is connected, and we are only as secure as the most vulnerable among us. The recent IOM study on the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on migrant workers in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand that we released last month shows that people are earning less, lower wages. They're experiencing higher rates of unemployment, and they face greater uncertainty, especially for migrant women. So policy can make a difference in people's lives, and in turn, in the resilience of the society and economy. You might have followed that Thailand's have taken some measures following border closures and allowed for greater flexibility for migrants to change jobs and to allow for the renewal of work permits without leaving the country. 1.5 million people benefited from this measure. So that's a really important point to make also today. Additionally, in a long-term effort by the UN and partners, we are providing technical expertise for reform of the social protection systems, in particular, the mobility of benefits as people change jobs, and to integrate the informal sector that is so significant to Thailand's economy into the existing context. And then I'll close my interventions by providing some elements around the UN work with civil society. All of IOM's work, but also the UN as a whole, is enabled through partnerships. When we look to the future, the enabling environment for progress towards the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is one in which free and inclusive dialogue and participatory decision-making are at the foundations. The UN reaches our partners and the people we serve through NGOs and community-based and civil society organizations. Their networks, expertise at the local level are unique, and without which we would not be able to access the full data needed to make evidence-based policy or to reach to implement it effectively. The UN Thailand Cooperation Framework integrated these arrangements to make sure that we have a dialogue with civil society, including for the youth and women's groups, vulnerable people as well as those that have been historically been at the margins. So the UN system as a whole would like to reaffirm also its support for civil society organizations in Thailand to operate freely and effectively. This is really critical to the UN's work, as well as the full range of our partnerships with government, the private sector, and civil society in all its forms. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much, Dr. Apiwat.
Thank you very much, Géraldine. We have a couple of minutes, actually. I really like what you mentioned about partnerships and dialogue, and what you mentioned. It seems like, to me, the UN system itself is a global commons. I mean, it's, you know, we don't think of the UN as a commons because we think of the UN as an organization. But from what you mentioned is the fact that the UN itself is so critical in helping different communities and nations form that partnership, and it feels like, you know, the UN itself is a global common to me. I would like to ask for your quick response, because we have another round for you. In terms of civil society, though, how do you actually build the society from the, you know, local community level, ground up, all the way to the global level? I mean, what do you see the connection there between the local level community and the global level community? Just a quick response, if you have, please.
Thank you, Dr. Apiwat. I think this is what we're trying to do here, and this is the connection we're trying to make when we talk about partnerships. I think you're right to say that the UN, is some sort of common goods, right? But at the end of the day, the UN agencies in countries rely on local organization, grassroots organization. As I said, to have the reach, at the local level, to implement and to get information for us to support authorities and partners to develop the right policies or the right interventions. So what is really important is to make this connection, as you said, with the higher level, the more political or policy-oriented discussions, and the operational level. And that's why within the work that we're doing here, we've focused a lot of our efforts on making sure that we create platforms for grassroots organization, for young people, for women, for migrants, to share their knowledges, their experiences. We have this youth panel, for instance, that has been working with us from Thailand, representative from all provinces that have been able to share their insight to global discussions within the UN. We do a lot of consultations very regularly to prepare this cooperation agreement with vulnerable groups in the field, with migrants, refugees, and other communities. So on Monday, for instance, I, with a group of women ambassadors, will be hosting for the Women's Day a young female from Thailand. They will be following us every day during 1 or 2 days to see the work of the UN and to give us, understanding of their expertise in different fields. And this is the kind of initiatives that I think are really important for us to build on the expertise and the knowledge of people in a country and national and small organizations that we have to work with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the example. Now, I would like to ask our second panelist today, Professor Ora-orn Poocharoen. Ora-orn, you are the founding director of this School of Public Policy, and you are not just a researcher and teacher, but also a practitioner of futures. Basically, you do quite a lot of work on governance and futures. What's your view about the challenges that we face to connect communities and to create the global commons, and how we can overcome those challenges?
Thank you very much, Ajahn Apiwat, and greetings to all the panelists. Ajahn Apiwat, you really pose challenging question, and I'm gonna answer I'm gonna provide my thoughts surrounding 2 points, and it links to Géraldine's point as well. The first point is identity, and the second point is inclusivity. So on identity, I think the challenge that we have is most of us identify ourselves limited to only our nationalities, maybe our gender, our role in family as mother, father, daughter, son, our role in our professions as professors, researchers, civil servants, and so on. Our identity as a global citizen hardly exists. We talk about it, we try to teach it, but it doesn't exist. I've never conducted any workshop where I could see participants identifying their own identity as a global citizen. So I think this is one of the major problems that we have today that does not allow us to think of global commons. I just want to point a key fact that, for instance, on climate change, we must not forget that with or without human beings on this planet, the Earth will continue. So really, we have to realize that the Earth will continue without our species. So when we talk about climate change, for instance, again, we continue to limit on what nation states will do. So my thought about human beings is, and this will link to the futures literacy too, we're so busy of being human doings, human doings. We do so many things. We try to advocate, we try to change policies, we help, people, but we don't spend enough time as human beings. So the identity of being a human being, of being a global citizen, I think that's what is lacking. And that's my first point. My second point on the, this challenge to create global commons is the word inclusivity. So I think what's happening now, for example, this conference, wow, I'm seeing so many new names, new faces, listening to people talking wonderful stuff. But honestly, we're not that connected, truly. The idea of social connections, the idea of meaningful connections and relationships, I think has not truly prospered through digital connectivity. And so, for example, now when we need food, when we need a ride, we hail Grab, we have Uber. A lot of things that we need in daily life is now transactional. It's not through truly connectedness of societal connectedness and inclusiveness that we are helping each other out. And so I think this idea of inclusivity, I would also add it to include the whole range of psychological fears of rejection, of loneliness, of not feeling belong, of ostracization. And it could even be one of the explanations of, for instance, the behavior of certain leaders with powerful military force or weaponry who would then react violently or use force rather than peaceful means to solve problems, which actually come from the fear of ostracization, being rejected, being not included. So this idea of inclusivity, which I think is broader than leaving no one behind, linking with Géraldine's point, the idea of inclusivity, we can operate that on all levels, from our own family, where we include everyone, where we invite everyone for, New Year party or Christmas dinners or some grand festival, to how we include nation states or emerging economies, how we always question who's at the table and who's not. I think the idea of inclusivity could be used in a very, very positive manner to actually bring peace. So, but I don't think we've gone that far yet. We've never used the word inclusivity or leaving no one behind to that level. We've always limited ourselves to minority groups, vulnerable groups, or people who are economically unequal, so on and so forth. So I just want to throw that in case that can lead to some new ideas of governance principles for the United Nations, even at the very global level. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I thought my question was challenging. I think your answers were even more challenging for us to think even more. So thank you very much for that. Now let's turn to Professor Kitamura. You are an educator yourself, and you teach and do research on comparative education and international development. I would love to hear from you, from your perspective, not perhaps from the education field or even more beyond that. What are the challenges that you see to connect us together?
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Apiwat, and also I'd like to thank Michiko-san and her colleagues at Chulalongkorn for giving me this precious opportunity. And also I would like to thank Surichai for connecting me to this event. And then I very much, very nice meeting you to all the panelists and the participants. And then I really would like to raise two challenges we are facing. And then in order to overcome such challenges, as Apiwat indicated, I really would like to share my views from the educationalist Okay, and then so first challenges are actually already Géraldine and Ora-orn have pointed out, and then somehow my point is linked to their points raised. My point is that the disparities, there have been huge disparities among the people in terms of the access to the resources. We have various different resources. Of course, resources include natural resources, financial resources, but also human resources. And in order to access to these resources, not all the people around the globe have had the same opportunities and the same level and quality to have access to these resources. So we have seen actually, huge disparities among the people. So that's one challenge we really need to overcome or deal with. And second challenge, I've been using the word double burden. This may not be so familiar to you. Double burden means we have to deal with plural challenges at once. So for instance, in the era of SDGs, we cannot simply apply our conventional approach to solve the problems we are facing today. In fact, the Thai society is one good example. For instance, you are still having younger populations, but at the same time, you are also having an aging society. This is not really typical. I mean, when we look at the experiences of other countries, including Japan. Because when we start having the aging society, normally, we start having less and less younger populations. So that's the problem we used to see, and we still see in many countries, particularly in the West or, in so-called industrialized countries. However, Thai is very typical, but some other countries as well. You are dealing with these two things at once. So this kind of phenomena is quite interesting. For instance, in developing countries, we often talk about hunger, and then we still have an issue of hunger. However, at the same time, we have been seeing a dramatic increase of the obesity, people who are becoming fat in the context of developing countries today. This is quite new to us, but we can think of the reasons. For instance, in terms of the obesity, why people from actually, it's not only in developing countries, but in developed countries as well. Now you can see the quite close link between the economic situation and the risk of being obesity, because people from the poor family, poor economic backgrounds, they normally have access to the poor quality of foods. So that's why they can easily get the calories with low cost. Anyway, these are the kind of the issues we are now dealing with. And then, we cannot apply the conventional single approach to deal with these kind of challenges because there are so many problems happening at once. So that's the very complicated situations the SDGs has highlighted to us. So the disparities and also very complicated problems, which I, for instance, call double burden. How we can deal with these challenges and how we can overcome this. As Apiwat said, the education is a key. And I really like to emphasize the importance of promoting education for sustainable development. Because we call ESD, Education for Sustainable Development, really encourage students and the learners to find the problems existing in the society, and then try to understand what are the reasons of the problem, what are the reasons and the causes of the problems, and then try to explore the ways to solve those problems. So you cannot just sit in the classroom to study. You have to link with the community. You have to go out and meet people and then listen to people and then discuss with the people. And also you need to observe what is actually happening in the society. So this approach we call whole community approach. Whole community approach needs to be promoted. And then by promoting education for sustainable development, what we are expecting people to people to develop their literacies. And then I would like to use the in a plural manner, okay, not the literacy in a singular form, but the literacies. So we really need to understand. We really need to understand what is happening in very complex situations, as I explained earlier. So we are not really focusing on single literacy, but the literacies to understand what you know in front of us, like the word futures. I mean, so this conference is all about futures. So plural, very complex futures we are facing. We really need to cultivate and foster the literacies of the people by promoting education for sustainable development. So that's a very simple response to your questions, but I have two issues, and then I just would like to highlight the importance of education here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, you said that your response was simple, but it's primarily about complexity. So, I mean, I totally agree about complexity, and it begs the question of, you know, how we as educators can actually bring in that complexity, but at the same time make it simple enough for you know, for our students to understand. Thank you, Professor. Professor Imtiaz, your work is about international relations and you know, genocide studies. I mean, that itself is a huge global issue. From your perspective, what are the key challenges that we face to create this sort of global commons called peace?
Thank you very much. Dr. Ora-orn, I think, said something which is foundational and very philosophical. She didn't elaborate on that though. I think she made a statement saying whether the earth will continue or the earth will continue without human beings. Back in 1930, two Nobel laureates sat down to discuss precisely what Dr. Ora-orn flagged. And the two Nobel laureates were Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore. Einstein is a physicist, and as a scientist, he believed in objective reality independent of human consciousness. Rabindranath Tagore, on the other hand, was a mystic poet. So both sat together and debated on a very simple question. And the question was, will beauty, truth, table, and by implication the moon, and now I can extend with Dr. Ora-orn's implication, the earth will exist without human beings. Tagore, who was a mystic poet, came out with an emphatic no. He said, no human beings, then no beauty, no truth, no table, not even the moon. And Einstein understood beauty very quickly because, we really don't know whether a cow or dogs, if they look at Taj Mahal, they would say, oh, it's a beautiful building. We don't know because, it's only beauty, only humans can express beauty. But he paused on the issue of truth. Tagore reminded him that, look, only humans, whether truth is realized through human beings, because a mosquito is not going to come and say, Prof, you're not saying the right thing, only human being. And they continued. At the end, Einstein had to surrender. And he said something which is very interesting. To mystic poet Tagore, he said, and I'm quoting Einstein, I think I am more religious than you are, full stop. Because only by, only by taking refuge in religion, Einstein could save himself. Otherwise, there was no way he could save himself. Well, this was long before quantum mechanics came, where humans are required in order to say whether it's a wave or a particle. So he was familiar with a little bit of quantum mechanics, but he got his idea not from quantum mechanics. He got his idea from the Bauls. We have in Bengal a Baul sect who believes that the god or divine is inside human beings and not outside. Okay. Now that takes me to the point that we need to invest in human beings. And I think members have already pointed out, but we need to have the philosophical base saying that without human beings, there is no other way you can change the future, because only humans can change the future. Others change though, but others do it instantly. But human beings can actually design, can actually draw, can actually dream. And this is very, very fundamental, because if you go back to Descartes' statement, I think, therefore I am, I'm sure some of you are familiar that by the time it came to Frantz Fanon, it became I feel, therefore I am, because I think created colonialism and slavery and all those things. So Frantz Fanon was not really excited about this Cartesian understanding. Now, many years back, and also I think two decades back, I came out with this statement saying, I dream, therefore I am, because only humans dream. And this is particular because without dream, but the problem is the dream has been hijacked in many ways, because if you have a colonized mind, then you're dreaming somebody else's cities, else's dress, somebody, and this is where I think education becomes very important, because what we have today is what I would refer to as singularity, the politics of singularity. And this is because of the nationalism, which has already been flagged. The modern nation state is so singular. Now, if you have in universities politics of singularity, training the young minds, then we are not going to go very far. Well, United Nations would be a good example. It's an intergovernmental agency. Talking about global commons would not really justify United Nations, because it is, after all, an intergovernmental agency. It works well pretty when it comes to development and other issues, but the moment it comes to security, the real security, then it collapses. And we have seen time and again, even the recent Ukraine crisis. So what I think is the challenge is the mindset that we have, which is singularity, and which we need to overcome. But that's not easy, because each and every country, we have national curriculum. Each and everybody has a silo, singularity and reproducing in the name of patriotism, in the name of whatever, glory. And we have so many of them now. And I would contend that the reason the COVID-19 became a pandemic and could not be located into an epidemic, largely because we had all this singularity in different countries. Of course, Donald Trump would be a big one, but so is Boris Johnson, so is Narendra Modi, so would be Brazil, and so would be Abe. All were into singularity. It was so unfortunate that back in December 2019 or January 2020, if they could all sit down and collaborate, that look, this is a dangerous vaccine, dangerous virus, because virus will be there. They co-live with beings. Virus is not something unnatural, but you need to face the virus. Virus will mutate, but the point is how you handle the virus. But there was no global cooperation. All they did was to block the borders. Now that's a funny one, because virus really doesn't know the borders, and it doesn't make any sense. And virus is more global, has more global commons in them than probably human beings. So the challenge would be to look into the singularity that we have over the years cherished and created structures of the structures everywhere. How do you deconstruct them and create a different kind of structures? Now here, I think the pandemic has given us some lessons. I would not say hope, because humans would forget the pandemic, forget so quickly. I was just saying in the last panel that I was there, that if you look at the figure of the last 1 week, the number of people who died in the Ukraine war and the number of people who died in the United States in COVID-19, there are more people who actually died in the United States in COVID-19, but that news is not there. It's, the whole COVID-19 pandemic is out of the mainstream news, and it is vanished. And it is unthinkable how quickly it vanished. So the point here is, how do we keep this momentum? And here I think we need to think out of the box. And I will, I don't want to extend my time, but let me flag one thing that has come out of the Global Commons and something which I think also links to the university. You see, the idea of Global Commons always, also gets transformed and it gets added, because earlier, if you remember, the high seas, the airspace, the outer space, these were the Global Commons, and then it got added. Antarctica got added one time, and then we have water. Water is now, a lot of critics are considering that that's also a Global Commons, and not to mention the cyberspace has suddenly also come up as some global space. Now, the point of cyberspace here, I think it's high time to flag the idea that whether this whole internet industry ought to be brought under the United Nations or ought to be brought under an international. Otherwise, you are going to get messed up the way SWIFT has become. The SWIFT has become so SWIFT. And immediately we can see China, Russia, others are India, all are thinking of a counter SWIFT, and very quickly we'll see in next 5 years there will be several SWIFT because of this. I think that was one of the blunder that was done this time by creating this SWIFT sphere. Many countries will make SWIFT of different kinds. So my point is, I'll stop here. Is that we new structures, and one of the structures I think where universities are there and the global commons of the cyberspace, I think it's time that we flag the idea of making the internet a global commons and not be part of a profit and something to do with the kind of thing that we are, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, all have become business ventures. I think that should not be the case. So that's the world I'm thinking that's coming up.
I think you're already answering, my second question, but we already see that's, singularity is the problem. That's sort of tied back to Ajahn Ora-orn's point about, the nation states and, singular identities that we hold on to. But you already suggest, one of the solutions, which is how we can make the internet, the digital sphere, global commons. Now let's turn to Ajahn Surichai. So we talked a while ago and often about how silos, everything from the university, the government, and everything is based on silos. And I think that's what Professor Imtiaz mentioned, singularity. Well, probably not singularity in terms of technological convergence, but we're so silo based. I mean, do you think that's the big challenge that we're facing? And do you see what else could be done to actually overcome that kind of challenge of singularity or single-mindedness?
Single-mindedness and singularity, maybe two of the different words for us to engage. But I am now very much attracted by this force of engagement by the intellectual discussion. You see, the question is, should I be aware of being dragged into this discussion, or should I be careful not to be? So I think my point here relates to the very sense, the very basic, how can I make sense out of the previous speakers, remaining myself as as someone listening and someone trying to respond. You see, it is not easy in the world of a lot of attractions and a lot of push and pulls. And here, may I start by putting myself in a very basic sense-making of myself in front or in listening to all the great key points made by my colleagues here. Now, I have two things to put forward at this juncture, so that I won't be lost in the jungle of my disorder. Okay. Having said about sense making, I would like to put myself a bit not how I feel in the context of how I listen to other people points. And I think here the challenge is the human side of ourselves are so important. I hope this is as a part of us being identity issue as a human being, or as someone working in a university for, say, the last nearly 40 years, 50 years. So you see, here I would like to base myself along the line of identity formation, and identity formation in the context of relationships, not alone. So the singular politics of singularity, if you allow me to say the first point, relates to the kind of single axis of being, oftentimes linear history. In our country, we talk a lot about big capitals, just in linear sense, but oftentimes those capital history of the country in the Orthodox history do not include the local bigger and longer and older kingdoms, for example, being it in the south or being it in the north, where I just happen to be born up north. But now all these places are not the central of the Thai historical axis, so to speak. So you see the politics of singularity, as it is powerful, but it has lost in many ways its attraction of how we make sense of our being apart from state-centric theater. Now, you see the issue here relates to this. I would like to emphasize the part because Géraldine, yeah, the UN system, if you allow me to speak, it's still centralized with one axis of the system, a bit too strongly biased along that line. Yes, I really appreciate your point about working more with rootedness of the civil society, rootedness of the localizing logic. But still, you see, here we may need each other. We may need each other how to make sense of the huge organizations and how to make sense of the huge context where we are in this complexity. So that's my first point. The challenge is how to make sense. Because my second point relates to the issue of power. We often, when we mention about politics of singularity, and we mention about the violence from people in the power, it oftentimes relates to the state. Oftentimes relates to people who have the machinery including the systems of coercion in their hands, and this is this is important point. But my point here again is a big challenge. The challenge is how can we make everyone, because government comes and go, in fact, but how can we relate to the sense of power beyond just mentioning something outside the world of the citizens or the world of the people. My point here relates to my central concern about something about inequality and conflict trap. The trap in the context of inequality and conflict oftentimes manipulated in many ways by people with interests, people with power. A lot of time relates to status quo, so in that logic, the issue of going beyond this, if we buy the logic of no one left behind, for example, we cannot just compromise this as immediate formula, because you cannot really be aware of the longer identity making that we are part, and we are all somewhere somehow born somewhere somehow, and we are all migrants somewhere somehow. So along that line, my second point, I would like to point out the issue of how can we get out this trap. It's so important, so difficult. I put this challenge in the context of education and university. University also trapped into this without really making efforts to go beyond it, to make aware. And I do not exempt the UN system as something outside this challenge as well. So just to get out of this world of inequality, we want to avoid violence, but still we are trapped into this a bit too visible SDGs or too visible immediate stuff, which the slogans bring us away from the real sense making with the poor, with the victims of unsustainability. So that's my point.
Thank you, Ajahn Surichai. Wow. I mean, you put some big questions there, and almost logical for me to ask Géraldine, not just to respond to the points that Professor Surichai mentioned, but also, sort of tying back to the theme of this conference a little bit about futures literacy. And now, the panelists have mentioned a few challenges. You yourself about the challenges of, partnerships, about the importance of dialogue, the importance of civil society, as well as, as Professor Surichai mentioned, Imtiaz as well, in terms of getting out of the boxes. We can be trapped in our, identities that we were, we grew up with, for example. So these are all the challenges that you see and you hear today. I would like to ask you, Géraldine, from your perspective, how do you think futures literacy could actually help us, get out of these traps, overcome the challenges, and perhaps eventually we'll be able to create some sort of, global commons, however you want to define it. Please.
Thank you. That's difficult, and I feel that I have very big shoes to fill today, especially with the very smart comments and interventions that I've heard from the panel. It's extremely enlightening, and I think we need more of this conversation with the UN country team. But I think for the second part of the interventions, I think for us, as the UN colleagues here working in Thailand, the emphasis that we wanted to really make is again on civil society and the role that they play in Thailand. There's here in the country very strong, diverse, vibrant civil society. every size in every area, provinces, NGOs, I mentioned, community-based organization. They're the hardest working, they're the most knowledgeable, and they're the most invested in their communities. And similarly, I mean, this meeting is organized and co-organized by university. So I think the role of young people also is extremely critical as partners, but also decision makers. I think that's how we see them. And that's why, as I mentioned last year, we've established this youth SDG panel, even though I know I've heard just before that SDG sometimes remain a bit more theoretical. But I also really think that we need to engage local voices in these initiatives so that it becomes actually something concrete that we can implement and brings achievements for the day-to-day life of people in countries where we operate. So we've done this consultation, and we will continue to do that this year, and also get new people on board to ensure that there's diversity in the voices that we listen to. But Thailand is also a regional hub, right, for civil society. So not only here, but for the sub-region. And something that we wanted also to mention is really some of the worries that we have around the recent discussion around the draft law that you might have heard on the non-profit organization, which is currently under consideration.
Yeah.
And I think this is also something important to note, that we, not only us, but we are very committed to support civil society partners, and we understand and we know their worries when it comes to this draft legislation. And this concern, I think, have been raised also by different UN bodies and rapporteurs, and we also discussing constructively with the authorities here on the issue based on the UN principle approach. So yes, I think our key message here is really to try to build and empower a very free civil society as a steady partner. If we don't do that, I think the future looks grim, and we see that in other countries. So I think more generally, I think futures literacy speaks to an expansive and flexible approach to partnership. We talked about civil society, we talked about the youth. Earlier, I talked about the LNOB groups. We also need to seek new partnership and opportunities to work and collaborate on shared interests. It's, for instance, the work that we do with the private sector. We've done quite a lot of work to ensure, for instance, that wages are protected for migrant workers. We work through new technologies, digital payments, even blockchain solutions to ensure that people are protected and people have access to decent work. If we look at the issues around climate action that have been discussed before, environmental degradation, in the lead up to COP26 last year in November, I know that the UN resident coordinator here, Gita, who couldn't be here today, and the UN country team have built coalitions around climate actions, biodiversity protection with the private sector and the investor community, and not only with government regulators or line ministries, because we need to focus also on this green recovery from COVID.
I see.
So I think, yes, that's our key messages at this point is partnerships, and really also a call to make sure that the diverse and vibrant civil society that exists here in Thailand, but also as a regional hub here, is really protected, but that we also think, toward the future and what type of partnership will be needed to implement some of the key development programming that we have in line with the priorities that I outlined earlier. I'll
Thank
stop
you.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, how partnerships could be built based on, the way we think about the common futures together, at all levels. Now, talking about futures, Professor Ora-orn, you yourself, as I mentioned earlier, you are a practitioner of future studies and foresight. I mean, from your perspective, how do you think futures literacy itself could actually be useful in, solving or overcome the challenges in even the ones that you mentioned, inequality and, the identity issues that are the obstacles to our creating global commons? Please.
Hey, yes, thank you very much, Ajahn Apiwat. I am a true believer of futures literacy. I think there are several points about futures thinking that is very useful. Number one, particularly the use of metaphors. It allows us to go beyond text and language. And that allows us to have, broader, more creative communication between different actors, different interest groups, different genders and different age groups, for instance, and even across languages, across different ethnic identities, for instance. So using metaphors, using pictures, using drawings, using art, or music, or anything that is symbolic of what you're actually trying to say. I think that is a very powerful form of communication in futures literacy that we need to highlight. Second, I think futures literacy truly allows us to question our assumptions. And it's not like your basic, what's your economic assumption or what's your political assumption? If we use the causal layer analysis, it's assumptions beyond the systems and structures that we see and is tangible. It's our own belief systems, our own unconscious, almost myths or metaphors or sort of narratives that we have running in our head or in our societies that we've never questioned. So I think that is truly powerful. It's emancipation. It's not even empowerment. It's emancipation. If you can get to that level of, I don't need to get married at the age of 30, or I don't need to have children, or I don't need to be married to a man. I can be married to a woman, or I can actually not be a Thai. I can be someone else, or I don't need to follow the footsteps of my parents who are business owners. I can actually be a singer or performer. This is at the individual level. But what about we use that at the policy level? To solve the problem of poverty, there must be something beyond giving subsidies and handouts. Bangkok's flooding, it's not the governor's problem. It's not the city's problem. It's climate change. Or is it beyond that? So if we take emancipation at the policy level, as I compare to the individual level, I think it has tremendous power for us to imagine something drastically different from what we're doing today. So my point about futures literacy in public policy, that's where I'm working the arena that I'm in. I'm very interested to continue to push forward experiments with different modes of decision-making processes by using futures tools, specifically to get us away from what we've discussed earlier, singularity of strategic planning, 4 years, input, output, outcome, or logic models of what's your, and this one, of course, the United Nations loves to use as well. What's the intervention and what do you expect out of get the intervention? All of those ideas, like the logic model, looks things at a linear and singular. It doesn't allow for complexity nor alternative scenarios, alternative plausible futures. So we're experimenting with that with the National Social and Economic Commission of Thailand, Sapapat, to try to come up with different ways of analyzing policies. Hopefully, will be emancipated and then have, you know, this ability to think out of the box, actually to see the cage that it's over us. It's already hard enough, but when we step out of the cage, it's like, what next? It's scary. I think it's very scary for policymakers, for civil servants who have been working, you know, 40, 50 years, working on the same thing. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, what? You mean not transportation? You mean mobility? What's that? You know, things like that. So I think there's huge potential. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a wonderful, you know, confirmation of how important this field of future study is. I mean, I don't even want to call it a field, but because that again put it into a box, right? So, but your point is wonderful, because you know what you mentioned is it's not just about the complexity of the issues that we're facing, like you know what Professor Kitamura mentioned earlier, but also the fact that future studies helped us sort of get out of the whatever conceptual trap that we're in, or the dogma that we're in, and that's probably responding to what Professor Imtiaz and Professor Surichai mentioned earlier about is us being this singular mindset and traps. Now, I guess I would like to ask Professor Kitamura, because you're the expert of not only about future studies, but also education. What do you think then, you know, the role of futures literacy in not just education narrowly defined, but broader perspective, please?
Thank you very much. I have been inspired by such a thought-provoking comments made by other panelists, and then thinking of how to get out of the silo or dogma we have been trapped, as Surichai pointed out. I have been thinking about, for instance, borders. I mean, how we are in such dogmas, and then I recall some very famous statement you must have heard before. This is the first line of the preamble of the Constitution of UNESCO. It starts like this: since the world begins in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men the defenses of peace must be constructed. This has been very powerful and very famous statement. Why we need it. We need the UN organizations such as UNESCO, and in fact the UN as a whole. And this statement really telling us how the war begins, because the minds of the men, and then the root causes must be the ignorance. The people don't understand. Ignorance doesn't mean that you are not educated per se. I mean, you can be you can have wisdom without going to schools. So I'm not saying that school, it's not schooling or school education or official formal education, but you have to learn. You have to be literate. You have to understand what is happening on the globe. So that's only the way to get out from the dogma we have been trapped. So that's the first point I really like to make. So education must be the powerful tool to get out of the dogma. But then I have been thinking, what we can do. I mean, what I can do, as a university professor. Then there's another issue brought up by Ajahn Surichai about the issue of power. And then, recently, we are not only talking about the power by the material or tangible power, resources, but also based on the intangible resources. Like Joseph Nye has been discussing about the concept of soft power or smart power. But, when we talk about these powers, there has to be always the issue of hegemony. So someone wants to take over the other. So when now I discussed about the soft power, and then there's a role of culture and the role of education, role of educational institutions as well. However, do we commit to the creation of a certain hegemony over the powers or over the competitions? That's not what the university people, people in the higher education have been looking for. So that's why last 5-6 years, I have been discussing with my colleagues over the concept called knowledge diplomacy. So we really need to promote the knowledge diplomacy. Knowledge diplomacy means, we are the diplomats. We are the diplomats who create knowledge, who share knowledge, who use knowledge. And then we transfer this knowledge to next generations. And the next generations will become another diplomats to work with knowledge. So the promotion of knowledge diplomacy is one of the very important mission for the universities and higher educations. And in order to do this, we really need to internationalize the universities, and then we have to be connected. So this pandemic really prevent us to be connected, but at the same time, like this, we have been connected. So we are not giving up. I think this is the futures we really trust. And so, then if we create futures, the next generations. So, through the promotion of knowledge diplomacies, we can really educate the next generations who contribute to the creation of the common futures by cultivating a sense of global citizenship among our students.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the second point I really wanted to make. So those two issues, points I wanted.
Thank you very much. This concept of knowledge diplomacy, that's so powerful, because these past few days we've heard a lot about war diplomacy, but yet for the long-term global commons, we do need that knowledge diplomacy. Professor Imtiaz, you mentioned some global commons from the sort of digital perspective and all. How would futures literacy fit into this sort of efforts for us to create global commons?
I guess the starting point ought to be the recognition that something that Professor Surichai flagged earlier, the issue of power. And on that, if you remember, if you look at literature, what we have is two big dystopias have been created, one in the 20th century and one in the 21st century. In the 20th century, the biggest dystopia that was created was by George Orwell, the book 1984, the Orwellian dystopia. And that was Big Brother is watching you. And that is where the state comes. And he did not have a Stalin in his head. A lot of people thought the Soviet Union. He got his idea from the BBC when he was working in BBC. And he made it very clear that he was in BBC, he thought somebody is watching him. So he got the idea of Big Brother is watching him while working, doing the war in the BBC. Now that was Orwellian dystopia. Now 1984 is gone, but we have somebody, the second 21st dystopia created by Haruki Murakami with his book 1Q84. And this is Murakami and dystopia is an interesting one, because he said, okay, Big Brother that is there, but you have little people are watching you. Now that is the new dystopia, and you can then extend the idea looking into the little people, whether it's narco-terrorists or the smugglers, the women traffickers, the money launderers, illicit weapon suppliers, and that's huge, and it's equally what you call a kind of a dystopia which actually reproduces the Orwellian dystopia, because the more you have the Murakamian dystopia, the more the state would say, look, I told you, we need more police, we need more military, we need more security. So you are in a quite a contradiction, and how do you get out of it? Because your two dystopias are really killing you, from the top and from the bottom. So the universities are really, they thought, okay, let's contain the Orwellian dystopia, but then suddenly you have this Murakamian dystopia, which I think, and that's so global that you can't really, because it's not only the state, the non-state has become a problem. So, the whole UN system is state-centric, let's put it that way, okay? Not non-state-centric. even if they work on non-state, it is not. And more ironically, it is the stateless people who have become global. Quite irony. If you're a stateless people, then you end up being a global citizen, because we are talking about global citizens. Who are global citizens? Well, the only global citizens today we have are the stateless people, because they don't have,
ironically,
ironically, no state is taking them, so they become the global citizen, whether it is, the Romas in Europe or the Rohingyas in South Asia, they are the global citizens. So my point is that we need to start by looking into this, some of these concepts and some of the things very critically to construct them, including the concept of civil society. I understand the UN uses the word civil society, but I find them problematic because they don't use it critically. Because civil society is nothing new. The different civilizations have produced different civil societies. In South Asia, for example, in Bengal, we had layers of a civil society of the old, the Indian tradition of civil society, which is Samaj and Rashtra. Rashtra is state and Samaj is society. And that's a, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism, they also had a civil society, of a different kind. And then we had the Islamic civilization. Bengal was under Muslim rule for over 500 years. And so the Islamic civilization got this idea of Jamai Madani. And that's also civil society, where the mosque is a civil society product. The mosque is not a state product. It's only now some states are making, but the history, if you look at the history of mosque, even madrasa, education, Al-Azhar University, the oldest university in the world is Al-Quran University in Fez, in Morocco. It's a product of civil society. In fact, a woman made the oldest university. The second oldest university is in Tunis. That's also civil society.
Right. So Professor Imtiaz, sorry to, but so you're basically saying that in order for us to think into the future, we do need to sort of deconstruct some of the existing concepts. Is that like that critical reconsideration or reconceptualization, like in the case of civil society that you gave us the example, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems like that's going to be the stepping stone towards future literacy that really will help us, I guess, emancipate, if I may use Ajahn Ora-orn's term. So critical thinking, I guess, would be a necessary condition there.
Yeah, well, one way of, as you deconstruct, you also have to remember the moment you deconstruct, you also reconstruct something.
Right.
So you have to be very careful what you are reconstructing, and here the mind becomes very critical, because we have this idea that mind, a child's mind is pure, which is not true.
Right, because there's some preconception.
Yeah, the mind of the parents and grandparents,
right,
brain is not pure, they carry the fear and the love of parents and grandparents. So if there is a genocide or if there's a violence, it goes from generation to generation. So I guess an attention not to the society as much to the person is required. And I think each and every person, we need to bring to the level of the person and empower the person, and not empower state or society and all, because that doesn't work. So I think that way is the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I guess Ajahn Surichai, you're the last speaker before we have a quick round, final round. But you have a few minutes to reconstruct what we have all deconstructed so far. So if I may ask you to say something, perhaps in a few minutes, before we wrap up, to reconstruct, the issues of hegemony, power, identity, inequality, all these things that we try to deconstruct, and yet, as Professor Imtiaz said, we have to reconstruct to build something. I would love to hear from you. What's your thought about that part, about reconstruction of something that we have just deconstructed?
I guess we are talking about each of us in a process. walking or going somewhere, and so it is not a finished action, but it is an action by asking ourselves, as well as not introvertly, but also outwardly, how we react or how we move ahead in terms of our doing. So being and doing together in a world of relationships, in a world of making sense of, so putting myself here, like, so how to engage in this discussion at this final part. Let me say two points to make myself a bit situated. The first point, you see, when I talk about power, I think it also resonates afterwards about the discussion that we are aware of power that is related to coercion or external power, and oftentimes we human beings create structures that become coercive power, and that is a part of our own making. So see here, but there are also other kinds of power, which when relates to going beyond politics of singularity. I think all this discussion relates to power, not power over someone's power over someone, but it's something power to here at this panel, power talking with you, power, I mean, being with you, I get some sense of power, some sense of confidence, some sense of firm move ahead into something more engaging. So power over is one type, which has become so problematic, but it is still much structured around many global and national framework. And this is the state-centric issue, the problem. But we still rely on this structure, you see, because they get a lot of taxes from us and whatever. But we have, so I want to emphasize the other kind of power, which may, in a way, when Ora-orn mentioned about emancipation, I mean power within yourself, power within our shared awareness, power within our dialogue. So in that sense, the power within community making, it is also, it has becoming more and more important. Along that line, when Géraldine mentioned work in progress, you use the word work in progress. We are all working something in progress. Along that line, so it is not a product, a ready-made product, because the UN system started by the state-centric systems, and not to forget that story, but still war began in the minds of men, as Kitamura sensei said. So here, somewhere, somehow, UNESCO was supposed to be more active, but somewhere, somehow, it has also lost in a world of complexity. The power of money, the power of capitalism, the world system, and the state-centric power are having. We don't want to make it a point of complaint, but it's a fact that the imbalances in the power systems of the world has not been very much in favor of the smaller people, of the smaller states, so many people are pushed away as belonging to nowhere, the stateless. So here, that's my first point. So my second point relates to knowledge. And I think when I talk about power, if the responsibility of universities many of us belong to university, so I want to say so. In the light of this work in progress thinking with Géraldine, so I think the responsibility of knowledge in this world, in the making, which are not very much framed meaningfully together, need to be more articulated in the systems of our interactions. So this is my point about governance, going beyond the legal framework of governance, going beyond the state-centric governance, going beyond, but taking partnership meaningfully. I think along that line, if you allow me, you use the word knowledge just to share, making the responsibility of knowledge, because universities are not aware of their own being trapped into their own making because of walls of disciplines, walls of being away from real world communities. So university in that way need to relearn their own making to be a part of this change. And along that line, I think knowledge governance goes beyond the walls. It needs the bridges. We all need to bring the bridges a bit more strategic together. And for that, I think national framework not enough. UN system in the regional commissions like ESCAP need much more to be activated because they are locked even more in the bureaucracies, I feel. So along that line, we need a more regional sense of regional commons and global and regional along that line comes up with our awareness, making our enterprise, our engagement some steps ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I wish we had more time. I really do. I wish we had more time. But because we are really running out of time, and I wish we had more time for us to talk more. But if I may ask each of you to give really, one last point about, futures and global commons and governance, whatever. Just one last point, just quick points before we wrap up. Please, Géraldine, please.
Thank you, Dr. Apiwat. It's difficult to summarize.
Just whatever you'd like to say.
But I think a lot of very interesting points. I really like also the information from Dr. Ora-orn on the innovative work that they do on public policies, and how we should probably, as the UN, as you said, we quite bureaucratic, and we have, I think, a lot of things to learn from changing the ways we work, changing the way we think changes happen. And it's not, as you said, always a logical framework that is going to make things change for people, and inequalities gap to be addressed. So I think for me, what I get out of this discussion also is for us to think a bit out of the box and to review the way we think public policies impact people and how the UN can support those public policies. Yes, but I still think that civil societies, even though they've been here for a very long time in different civilizations, remain a key and important actor that we need to and governance structure, part of a governance structure that we need to work on and support as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Ajahn Ora-orn, please, your last words.
Yes, I have two quick points. One to Géraldine, that I completely agree with you on the role of civil society, and perhaps maybe we can collaborate to do a futures workshop for Thai government officials on how to, design societies that allow for civil society to flourish, so that they rethink about their policies towards nonprofits right now, which stems from fear. They are very fearful. So once we know their assumptions, I think we can help them overcome and emancipate all of us. But my second point, and I promised to touch upon the plenary session that I shared yesterday on higher education, and which is linked to Ajahn Surichai's question about the role of educators and universities. So I was going to say that I have two trajectories, but now I think both the two trajectories are actually the same. One is no more universities in the future because we're all, you know, there's no more borders for anything, for credit, for learning online, everything, and we're all like by contract. But the second one is the same, actually. It's just universities become one. So I was thinking, imagine what if we have like a global fund to fund universities that are beyond nation states? What would that happen? But last but not least, I've been asked by a junior academic who says, Atan Ora-orn, can you recommend how can I, you know, prepare myself for the future in this career? I said, you better prepare your resume to be able to do something else because we academics might be obsolete and not needed in the near future. So that's
there
me.
Will be a global, or there will be a global university that you mentioned, and you know, she will have a job there.
Yes, but I'm still going to practice gardening and cooking because my PhD might not be needed anymore.
Absolutely. All
Trying
right.
to be future ready. Thank you, Ka.
Thank you. Thank you. So yes, please, Professor Kitamura.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I really would like to emphasize the power of education. You know, this is a positive sense of power. You know, I think Ajahn Surichai was emphasizing. And then thinking of the power of education and the role of universities, I really would like to emphasize the importance of promoting transdisciplinary research activities. You know, the knowledge should not be monopolized by academics. Knowledge has to be shared and co-created by the people, I mean, from diverse backgrounds. So that's what I really like to make a point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much
for the wonderful conference. Thank you.
Professor Imtiaz, last words, please.
Well, humans are not only thinking beings, humans are also homo fable. You know, we are creative beings, we're not only homo sapiens. So I am hopeful. And I see that, you know, I think all have flagged the limits of university. I think one can either use the word that has been used for some time, multiversity, but also I think the time has come to use pluversity. You know, you know,
I like that.
Yeah, if you go for a pluversity, then immediately your curriculum would change. Your classroom is because the classroom has also become redundant because now room is space. You know, room is no longer classroom, and the class itself is a problematic concept because it's a privileged concept. So I use the word declass space. You know, in that way, pluversity can be made to be more, you know, acceptable. Yeah.
So I guess
I'm hopeful.
I guess we should change the name of Mai University to Chulalongkorn Plu University. All right, Ajahn Surichai, your last words, please, before we wrap up this session.
The immediate and the longer term need to be bridged. So while we are still having universities, we cannot say it can abdicate its responsibility. So I cannot just say because of the dream is powerful, so we don't. So the point here is that they are having a lot of responsibility over the structuring of the processes. So my point now relates to that being trapped into this oftentimes a ranking business have brought them away from the real sense of social responsibility.
Right.
And this is unjustifiable. So the responsibility cannot be substituted by dreams, but the responsibility must be responded by responsible engagement with the communities. And oftentimes ranking business make university the world of itself, isolating its own sense of awareness. So my point here is very much challenging how we are opening up the walls of the university in the invisible walls. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess we need future literacy to get out of or emancipate us out of this ranking trap, right? All right. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up here. I've got a lot of, cues from the tech people. I appreciate that. Thank you, the panelists, all of you, 5 of you, and all the hardcore people who are still listening to us. We do really appreciate your presence here. And I hope this is just the first for us to continue our engaging conversation about the futures, as well as other things that matter as global citizens here. So thank you again, the panelists, 5 of you, I really appreciate it. And to you, Kun Michiko, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Apiwat, and all the speakers and very rich exchanges. We are just warming up, I think. I would like now to invite Professor Narin Hiransuthikul to deliver closing remarks. Professor Narin is Vice President for Strategic Monitoring and Assessment, Planning, Budgeting and Well-being of Chulalongkorn University. As a leading epidemiologist of the country, Ajahn Narin has been, we could not hope for more suitable leader to chair the Chula COVID committee. And he has been ensuring our well-being on the campus and the communities during this very challenging time, as well as steering the university's strategic coordination. May we now welcome Professor Narin, please.
Honorable guests, distinguished speakers, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be here with you to conclude July Futures Literacy Week. Since beginning on February 28, July Futures Literacy Week has held public lectures, a book talk, and Futures Literacy Labs before culminating in the 2-day international conference. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all the speakers, panelists, and facilitators who made invaluable contributions to shape highly engaging programs. This has been an extremely enriching and thought-provoking week. As a professor of preventive and social medicine, I could not agree more with the many discussions that highlighted how the pandemic has forced us to think very differently. Public health is a domain where mutual dependence and solidarity is evident. The difficult experiences of living under COVID-19 have given every person from all walks of life an opportunity to reflect on civic and collective responsibility to care for humanity. Although many of us may be still learning to adapt to the new realities, we recognize that a significant shift in thinking is necessary to live in our world full of uncertainties. As Chulalongkorn University Vice President for Strategic Monitoring and Assessment, Planning, Budgeting and Well-being, I am therefore grateful that we could conduct July Futures Literacy Week at this juncture. Futures Literacy is an innovative learning tool that enables us to prepare for the unknown and encourages us to act on the present as responsible citizens. Given my responsibility as a strategic coordinator for higher education, I find the key messages from the various sessions this week vital for advancing debates and recontextualizing how the university can engage to be future socially responsible and to promote inclusivity at the policy level for a more sustainable future. Chulalongkorn University presently chairs the Council of University Presidents of Thailand, and I was delighted that we were joined by speakers and students from member university in panel sessions, lectures, and futures literacy labs. I hope we can continue to create many more opportunities ahead to jointly work for the futures. Before ending my closing remarks, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to all of our collaborators, including Unesco, the UN Resident Coordinator Office in Thailand, the Thai National Commission for UNESCO, the Lao National Commission for UNESCO, and our old and new partners across the globe for their tremendous support in making July Futures literacy work a reality. My special appreciation goes to the members of the organizing committee, the July Task Force, the Secretariat, and all those who contributed to making July Futures Literacy Week a meaningful encounter and engagement.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Narin. Dear participants, colleagues, partners, and friends, July Futures Literacy Week was never designed as a forum for futurists or foresight specialists. Rather, it has been carefully prepared to bring out diverse perspectives and wisdom embedded in our local knowledge and in various disciplines and practices that are essential components of futures literacy. Organizing committee is hoping that introducing futures literacy to our communities, we can reshape our vision and strategies to achieve sustainability, justice, and dignity in Asia and beyond. As we are here to promote civic and collective responsibilities to serve society, we all need to be committed to this path where we are not constrained by national and short-term interests, but rather where each one of us reaffirms our commitment, caring for multiple voices, to work toward lasting solutions to build human capacity for resilient global communities. Thank you very much again for participating in this program. We look forward to our future collaborations and meeting with you again in our next program. Sawadee ka.